guys, it's Ariel
and Jason
from Fix My Books, and today we're going to be talking about the Notice of Collection versus the Notice of Assessment.
So why did you get a Notice of Collection?
Okay, so let's get started.
So Notice of Assessment. Basically, the purpose of this is for the CRA to communicate that you have filed your tax return and that you have either an amount owing or a refund based on the return that was filed. Typically, this is issued within 8 weeks of filing, but you'll very likely receive one immediately if you do e-file, and that will be something called an express notice of assessment. And a couple of weeks after that, you'll receive something called the official notice of assessment. And the taxpayer's action is just to review the accuracy of the assessment and pay any taxes owing. However, it's probably going to be exactly based on what you filed. They wouldn't have changed anything.
So just to note, everyone gets a notice of assessment. This is not something that you did and then you got in trouble, so you got a notice of assessment. No. If you file a tax return, expect to get a notice of assessment.
Yeah. So this next one is the serious one, notice of collection. This is one that you don't want, and not everyone gets it. So
the purpose of this is to follow up communication from the CRA indicating that the taxpayer has an outstanding debt that needs to be resolved. So it is issued after multiple reminders and warnings if the taxpayer has not paid the amount due as per the notice of assessment. So we'll go through the timeline, but there's a lot of stages before it goes to the notice of collection. So you have to have been kind of ignoring the CRA for a while before they sent the notice of collection. So once you do get this, your taxpayer action has to be to either arrange payment, request a payment plan, or if you think they're wrong, dispute the notice.
Yeah, so we'll just get into it. So the function of the notice of assessment informs the taxpayer of their tax obligations based on the return, while the notice of collection is a demand for payment for overdue taxes. The notice of assessment is issued shortly after the return, whereas the notice of collection is issued after you've kind of ignored the CRA for a while.
Okay. So again, everyone gets a notice of assessment, but not everyone will get a notice of collection. You'll only get one if you fail to pay the assessed amount, okay? Whatever tax you owe, if you fail to pay that.
So this is the timeline. Just note that the dates on here, so April 30, May 31, these are all just generic dates. They don't really mean anything. It's just giving you sort of an approximation based on
if you file on day one, basically.
So most everyone is going to file on April 30. The only reason why you wouldn't is if you have a business, but just disregard that for the time being in this example. So day one, you file your tax return, and then within 30 days and up to 8 weeks, you receive your notice of assessment. So obviously the dates will change based on when you receive this assessment date, the assessment. And day 60, you owe, let's say, $5,000, and you haven't paid it, and this is now considered really a failure to pay, and we now move on to the CRA contacting you. So approximately day 75, you get your first verbal warning. They'll try to call you over the phone, just ask you, are you aware of the debt? Can you make a payment towards the debt? If not, can you make some sort of payment arrangement where you're going to make installment payments, etc. And then you'll get another warning if you've ignored them, day 90, and then it starts getting more serious after that. So the third verbal warning will occur around 105 days, but all these days, again, they're just vague guidelines. It doesn't exactly mean that on exactly day 105 you'll get a third verbal warning.
It's just so you know what to expect.
Yeah, and then after all that, you're going to get a written warning. So they're just asking you to make a payment because obviously the phone calls have failed. And then the serious thing is, while you're here, the notice of collection. So day 150. So you've obviously left this for quite a while. You've probably been given a few warnings and not followed through with the CRA. And now they are basically telling you you're in collections, you need to arrange a payment plan, request some sort of payment plan, or start disputing the notice as your final option to try and amend what was filed previously.
So some people actually, they don't get the verbal warnings because like they like it will come out with like a scam call or something. They don't believe it's really the CRA calling them or something like that.
Yeah, so if you're one of those people, you get a lot of scam calls, just like us. The best thing to do would be, if the CRA calls, answer the phone and say, I don't know who you are. I don't believe it. I get a lot of scam calls. So please give me your agent ID and your direct line number, as well as the location in which you work and your name, and I'll call you back. And just go through the CRA website, get the phone number, call them up, and ask to be transferred to that person. Now, then you'll know that this is obviously real and you're in collections. However, you would have received the letter anyway.
So the other way to also find out if it's really the CRA is to check your CRA My Account and check if there's any mail there from the CRA talking about, we're going to collect money from you and stuff like that.
And just be aware, when you log into that account, one of the first things you'll see is your statement of account right in the front center of you, and it will say whether or not you owe money.
Yeah. Okay, so day 150, you got the notice of collection. Okay. You need to arrange payment, request a payment plan, or dispute the notice. If you do not, on day 180, the CRA may begin legal actions. So this can include garnishing wages, freezing accounts, or seizing assets. So you need to negotiate payment plans, file your objections or appeals.
Yeah, we'll go through all of these for you so you understand them. So the types of payment plans and types of payment arrangements you can make. The standard one that everyone would know is lump sum payment. So you just pay the full amount of debt immediately. No, I don't think that needs any further explaining. Partial payment, so paying a portion of the debt over a specified period. Now, this can be split up in various different ways. It doesn't need to follow exactly what I'm saying. So you could say that you've got money now to pay 20% of it up front, and then over the course of 5 months, you can make several installment payments to it, and then one lump sum balloon payment at the end of that. That's sort of a partial payment. Varying degrees based on your own individual circumstance. Monthly installment payments, so you can spread the debt over several months to make the payments more manageable. So this would be like repaying a loan. So for example, you owe $50,000 and you want to make a payment of $1,000 a month until the debt is paid, something like that. You've also got deferred payments, where you're arranging a later start date to pay the tax because you currently are not able to pay the tax. So you've probably got some sort of issue, like something that you've got to spend money on, or you're waiting on money to arrive, and therefore you need to defer the start date of the payments. And then you've also got payment extensions, and this is where you extend the due date for the payment and allow for more time with the financial arrangements.
Okay. So the types of legal actions that the CRA can take. So number one is garnishment of wages. The CRA may contact the taxpayer's employer to deduct a portion of their wages to cover the debt. It can be up to 30% of net pay. Some other provinces, not Ontario, I've seen online, they go up to 50% of the net pay. But so far, this has happened to several people. I've had to do this, and it does usually hit around 30%. And what happens is that your employer will withhold 30% of your net pay, and they will send it to the CRA directly.
You don't want this one because it's fairly intrusive into your life. So your employer will see, people in your workplace will see. Yeah. And the next one is also bad because it's also intrusive.
So the next one is freezing bank accounts. So they can issue a requirement to pay to financial institutions, freezing the taxpayers' bank accounts and diverting funds to the CRA. So for example, obviously everyone knows what it means when you freeze a bank account, but the way they can divert funds is, for example, if you're using like a payment merchant through a bank, you process credit card payments, they could order the bank, hey, we want like 30% of all the credit card payments to go to us instead of that guy, right? Because they haven't paid us.
Additionally, as well, if they do freeze your bank account, the way it would become intrusive is if you need to pay your rent and you have to tell your landlord, sorry, my bank account is frozen. You have to pay, friends back for something. You can't go to dinner, etc.
Mm-hmm. So next is seizing assets. So the CRA can seize and sell the taxpayer's assets, such as property or vehicles, to recover the debt. So it could be, your house, a cottage you own, investment property, your car, anything that's worth anything, the CRA can seize it.
Yeah, this one can be particularly invasive, and if you have a car and you need it for work, so income producing, so it's an income producing asset, you need to make sure that you explain that to the CRA, otherwise they will try to seize it or put a levy and lien against it.
Now, the last one is set off, so the CRA can apply any tax refunds or government benefits that the taxpayer is entitled to against their debt. So I've seen this.
This is very common.
It's very common, and I've seen this happen a lot with businesses. So, for example, if you have an HST refund that you're expecting, but then you have some income tax that you're owing, they will apply the HST refund against the income tax. So then you're like, where's my money, CRA? And they're like, oh, no, because you owe us, so we took the money first.
Yeah, or another one is if you have a personal tax debt, a very small one, and you've filed your tax return a bit late, but they've already gone through the payment date for the Canada Carbon rebate, and that rebate has been paid into your account, but you haven't filed your return yet. You file the return, shows the debt, they take the rebate and apply it to the tax debt.
Okay, so requesting a payment plan from the CRA. So number one is you have to actually talk to them.
Yes,
okay.
You can't ignore them anymore.
You have to contact the CRA to actually discuss the financial situation and negotiate a payment plan.
But just before all this, we want to make sure that if you do have some sort of issue, a tax issue where you owe a considerable sum of money, not just a couple of $1,000s, but a considerable sum of money that you can't pay, or you're unsure whether you'd be able to pay, contact a professional to work this out for you that can help set up a payment plan or installment agreements, because doing it yourself can sometimes end badly. You agree to pay more than you actually would be able to afford, and that a professional can help work this out for you. I mean, we do this as well, but there are a lot of people that help do this in Canada.
Mm-hmm. So next, the CRA will assess the taxpayer's financial situation and propose a suitable plan. So like what Jason said, it has to be something that is doable for you. So you can't just promise to pay $1,000 a month when you only earn like $2,000. You can't be paying them half of what you earn. You need to live, you need rent, you need food. So make sure that when you do a payment plan with the CRA, it is doable for you, because the last thing you want is not being able to stick with that payment plan, because then it just gets worse.
Yeah, and the time frame. You have to make sure that you're doing this as soon as the notice of collection is received to avoid further legal action. So before they,
seize
assets
yeah,
and freeze bank accounts, etc. It's better when you're upfront with this sort of thing and you deal with it, because the more that you ignore them, the worse it can become. And they probably, they're regular people, right? They probably feel like they're just being ignored. Mm-hmm. And their job is not to give you a hard time. Their job is to simply get you into compliance. So following the compliance procedures will alleviate all the negative consequences.
Yeah. So 4 is documents. So the taxpayer may be required to provide financial statements and other relevant documents. Again, they'll go through your bank statement, check what goes in, check what goes out, see what you can really afford to pay them.
Yeah, they need to actually get to what your real level of income is, what your real level of expenses are, as well as assets, obviously, and net assets.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is another timeline, which is the objections and appeals timeline. So again, it starts when you file your tax return. Then, like normal, you'll get a notice of assessment approximately 30 days after your filing. And then this is kind of where it differs. On day 120, if you do not agree with the notice of assessment, you can file a notice of objection. Okay? And the reason, there could be different reasons, but one reason why, for example,
it's not day 120 though. It's within the 90 days.
Yeah.
After you receive your notice of assessment. So it's just 120 here because we're going from the tax filing date.
Yeah.
But also just note that this goes up to 1 year after filing your return.
Okay, and you can file a notice of objection using Form T400A, but this can't be like a frivolous objection. It has to be.
You actually have to have a legitimate reason as to why you're objecting. So there was something that the CRA assessed incorrectly. There's something that was done incorrectly on the return, and it wasn't your fault, etc. There needs to be an actual reason, and not just that you don't want to pay it.
Okay.
Because the big issue with this is when you file your notice of objection, it puts a stop on the collections process. So just like we saw before with the notice of collection, it puts a stop on any sort of collection action that's going against you. Now, that's why if you're going to file something, it has to actually have, legal weight. You can't just put a notice of objection in to what the CRA is doing just simply because you object. This is not like a funny law court scene where you're going, I object.
Yeah. And you can't just object because you want them to stop collection actions.
Don't, whatever you do not do that.
Yeah. So after you object and you file the notice of objection, it takes around 6 months to more than a year to process the notice of objection. And if your notice of objection is denied, you can appeal to the Tax Court of Canada. You must file your notice of appeal with the tax court within 90 days of receiving the decision of your notice of objection.
But really, if you're going to be filing with the tax court, please have a legal reason with a legal basis for why you are filing and appealing, because otherwise it's going to look incredibly silly. You're going to be wasting the court's time, which is already backlogged, just simply because you don't want to pay the debt, or you feel like you don't want to pay the debt. If you're starting your argument, any legal argument with I think or I feel, you're probably wrong.
Okay. So taxpayer relief provisions. So this is just waiving penalties and interest. So this is not like the US, and I think Jason can speak more about that, because in the US there's something called offers in compromise.
Offer in compromise.
Yeah.
So when you do an offer in compromise, that's when you're essentially negotiating with the IRS as to why a taxpayer cannot pay the full amount of debt. They're not a full pay situation, so the IRS will have to accept a lower amount.
Oh, when you say full pay,
full pay is like, so in Canada, everyone's basically a full pay situation. So what that means is, say you owe $100,000, you owe the $100,000. You don't owe $99,000 or $98,000 because that's all you can pay. No, you owe $100,000. In the US, it's different. They don't particularly want you to be bankrupt and destitute and having a very hard time paying this. So
you can negotiate it down.
You can negotiate it down and negotiate what I said before, the offer in compromise.
Mm-hmm. So this is not like that. This is just waiving the penalties and interests on the taxes that you owe.
There is a special situation in which you can file something similar to an offer in compromise. However, we can't file it, and it has to be filed by a very special person called a LIT.
Something trust.
Yeah, licensed insolvency trustee. Yeah. And they will do something called a consumer offer. I believe that's what it's called. Or not consumer offer.
Okay.
So taxpayer relief provisions. This one's a bit different from what goes on in the United States. So some people here may have heard of something called an offer in compromise, and that's where you're going to reduce the tax that you owe to the IRS because that's all you can pay. However, in Canada, essentially everyone's a full pay situation where if you owe $100,000, you need to pay the $100,000 of debt. There is no other offer that you can present to the CRA to reduce the taxes owing. There is a very, very special situation which is filed by a licensed insolvency trustee, which is called a consumer proposal, which can do this. However, we don't know much about that because we're not allowed to deal with that. Only the licensed insolvency trustee is able to file those.
Mm-hmm. So this actually just waives your penalties and interest. Again, you're on the hook for the full amount of the taxes that you owe. And if you want to try to waive your penalties and interest, you can submit Form RC4288. The application should be made within 10 years from the end of the tax year for which relief is sought. And please note that most of these are rejected. For them to waive this for you, it must be due to extenuating circumstances.
Yeah. So like the offer in compromise in the United States, where about 70% of them are rejected, unless you know what you're doing. Same thing goes for the RC4288 request for taxpayer relief here in Canada. So about 90% of these are going to be rejected.
We've had it waived for a couple of times.
We've had it waived quite a few times because we only do it for people that actually meet the criteria. We don't just offer to do it for people, charge them money, and then it gets denied and they still have to pay us. That's wrong. We only do it for the people where it meets the criteria. So there is actual presentable hardship in their situation, or there's a situation totally outside their control where they couldn't perform.
And guys, hardship is not, because I have to sell my car to pay you guys. That's not hardship.
That's not hardship. Hardship is, what's a good example of this? So say paying the penalties and interest for a family would result in them not being able to pay the medical bills for their child because the child is sick and they need to seek special medical care in a place where the specialist exists in the United States, for example, and no specialist exists in Canada. That is a extremely very rare circumstance.
Yeah.
But that's what this is for.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it. We hope you guys found this video helpful. Once again, this is Ariel
and Jason
from Fix My Books. Have a great day.
Bye.